Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Vincent Morrison stood in his mahogany-paneled office, gazing out at the Chicago skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. At 45, he commanded respect through more than just his successful construction empire. There was something in his pale gray eyes that made grown men choose their words carefully. His military background in Army intelligence had taught him patience, observation, and the art of strategic thinking. These skills had served him well in business, but tonight, they would serve a different purpose entirely. The Morrison family appeared perfect from the outside. Vincent had built Morrison Construction from nothing after his honorable discharge, transforming it into a multi-million-dollar enterprise specializing in high-end residential developments. His wife Diana, a stunning brunette with emerald eyes, played the role of devoted spouse at charity galas and business functions. Their 17-year-old daughter Amber was academically gifted, destined for an Ivy League education that Vincent had already secured through substantial donations. But Vincent had learned long ago that facades crumble when pressure is applied to the right points. Diana Morrison née Caldwell had married Vincent when his business was still small but promising. She came from old money, the kind that was running dry but still demanded appearances. Her father's pharmaceutical fortune had been squandered through poor investments and gambling, leaving Diana desperate to maintain the lifestyle she'd known since childhood. Vincent had been her salvation, a rough-edged veteran who cleaned up well and had the drive to build an empire. For 15 years, their marriage had functioned like a well-oiled machine. Diana managed the social aspects of his business relationships, while Vincent focused on expansion and operations. She was intelligent, beautiful, and understood that their partnership was as much about business as it was about love. Or so Vincent had believed. The first crack in the facade appeared 6 months ago during a routine review of the family's financial statements. Vincent noticed irregular charges on Diana's credit card, expensive dinners at restaurants he'd never been to, hotel charges during times when she claimed to be visiting her sister in Milwaukee, luxury purchases that seemed excessive even by Diana's standards. Vincent's military training had taught him to gather intelligence before acting. He hired a discreet private investigator, former FBI agent Rebecca Torres, who specialized in marital surveillance. What she uncovered over the following weeks painted a picture that would have destroyed a weaker man. Diana had been conducting an affair for over a year with Bradley Hutchins, a real estate developer who specialized in luxury condominiums. Hutchins was everything Vincent was not: smooth, sophisticated, born into wealth rather than having earned it. He was also married with 2 young children, making this affair a betrayal on multiple fronts. But the photographs Rebecca provided showed more than just sexual infidelity. Diana and Bradley were photographed multiple times with architectural plans, property documents, and what appeared to be Morrison Construction's confidential project files. They weren't just sleeping together. They were planning something that involved Vincent's business. The deeper Vincent dug, the more the scope of the betrayal became clear. Diana had been feeding Bradley information about Morrison Construction's upcoming projects, allowing Hutchins Development to submit competitive bids with insider knowledge. She had access to Vincent's home office, his personal files, and his trust. That trust had been weaponized against him. But what truly ignited the cold fury that now burned in Vincent's chest was the discovery that his own daughter had become complicit in the betrayal. Amber had always been closer to her mother, sharing Diana's love of luxury and social status. Vincent had attributed this to typical teenage behavior, perhaps even feeling guilty about the long hours his business demanded. But Rebecca's investigation revealed that Amber had been serving as a lookout and messenger for her mother's affair. Text messages recovered from Amber's phone showed her alerting Diana when Vincent returned home early, helping coordinate meetings between Diana and Bradley, and even lying directly to Vincent about her mother's whereabouts. The girl Vincent had loved unconditionally, whose college fund he had personally guaranteed, whose future he had secured through his own sacrifice and ambition, had sold him out for designer handbags and increased allowance money. Vincent closed the investigation file and walked to his private safe, retrieving a bottle of 25-year-old Macallan. He poured himself 3 fingers and settled into his leather chair, considering his options. Lesser men might have confronted Diana immediately, demanding explanations and ultimatums. Weaker men might have forgiven, believing that families could survive such betrayals. But Vincent Morrison was neither lesser nor weaker. He was a predator who had learned patience in the mountains of Afghanistan, where rushing into action meant death. No, Vincent would not confront anyone just yet. Instead, he would plan. He would gather more intelligence. He would identify every person involved in this betrayal and map out their weaknesses, their fears, their pressure points. Then, when the time was right, he would act with the precision and ruthlessness that had made him successful in both war and business. Diana had made a critical error in judgment. She had mistaken Vincent's love for weakness, his trust for blindness. She had forgotten that the man who built an empire from nothing was not someone to be underestimated or betrayed lightly. As Vincent sipped his whiskey and watched the city lights twinkle below, he began to smile, a cold, calculating expression that would have terrified anyone who understood its meaning. Diana and Bradley thought they were playing a game of deception and manipulation. They had no idea that they had just entered a war zone, and Vincent Morrison had never lost a war. The first phase of his plan was already taking shape in his mind. It would be comprehensive, devastating, and irreversible. By the time he was finished, Diana and Bradley would understand the true cost of betraying Vincent Morrison, and his daughter would learn that some choices carry consequences that last a lifetime. Tomorrow, Vincent would begin laying the groundwork for their destruction. But tonight, he would go home, kiss his wife goodnight, and continue playing the role of the oblivious husband. After all, the best predators never let their prey know they're being hunted until it's far too late to escape. Chapter 2: The Gathering Storm. 3 weeks had passed since Vincent confirmed the full scope of the betrayal, and his web of intelligence had grown exponentially. He now knew Bradley Hutchins' schedule down to his preferred coffee shop, understood Diana's elaborate system of alibis, and had identified every person who had enabled their deception. Vincent's construction company had always employed individuals with diverse skill sets, former military personnel, ex-law enforcement, people who understood loyalty and discretion. Now, he began calling in favors and expanding his network with surgical precision. His first recruit was Marcus Webb, a former Army Ranger who had served as Vincent's demolitions expert in Afghanistan before joining Morrison Construction as a project foreman. Marcus had never forgotten how Vincent had carried him 2 miles through enemy territory after an IED explosion, and his loyalty was absolute. More importantly, Marcus had connections throughout Chicago's underworld, relationships forged during his years working security for various businesses before Vincent offered him legitimate employment. The second piece of Vincent's puzzle was Dr. Amanda Sterling, a forensic accountant who had helped Vincent navigate complex financial regulations during his company's expansion. Amanda was brilliant, thorough, and shared Vincent's appreciation for methodical planning. She also harbored a personal hatred for infidelity after her own husband's affair had cost her half her assets in divorce court. Vincent's third ally was Detective Ray Kowalski, a 20-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department who had grown up in the same neighborhood as Vincent. Ray's daughter had been killed by a drunk driver 3 years earlier, a driver whose expensive legal team had gotten him acquitted on technicalities. Ray understood that sometimes the system failed, and sometimes justice required alternative methods. With his team assembled, Vincent began Phase 2 of his operation, comprehensive surveillance and evidence gathering. Marcus's underworld connections provided access to surveillance equipment that was both illegal and highly effective. Within days, Vincent had audio and video feeds from Bradley's office, his car, and his favorite hotel suite. The technical quality was military-grade, providing crystal-clear evidence of every meeting, every phone call, and every intimate moment between Bradley and Diana. But Vincent wasn't interested in simple divorce evidence. He was building a case for total destruction. Dr. Sterling's financial investigation revealed that Bradley's seemingly successful business was built on a foundation of fraud and deception. Hutchins' development had been inflating property values, bribing city inspectors, and using substandard materials in construction projects. More damaging still, Bradley had been using his investors' money to fund his lavish lifestyle, including the expensive gifts he showered on Diana. The evidence was comprehensive and damning, but Vincent needed more. He needed Bradley to commit an act so undeniably criminal that his entire world would collapse simultaneously. That opportunity came when Vincent learned about Bradley's latest project, a luxury condominium complex that would compete directly with Morrison Construction's upcoming development. Diana had provided Bradley with Vincent's architectural plans, construction schedules, and bid proposals, giving Hutchins Development an insurmountable advantage in securing the contract. Vincent realized this wasn't just about an affair, it was corporate espionage designed to destroy his business and steal his future. Diana and Bradley weren't just betraying his marriage, they were systematically dismantling everything he had built. The discovery transformed Vincent's cold anger into something far more dangerous: absolute determination. Through Detective Kowalski, Vincent learned that the FBI had been investigating construction industry corruption in Chicago for over a year. They were building cases against several developers, but lacked the evidence needed for major prosecutions. Vincent began to see how Bradley's various crimes could be packaged and delivered to federal authorities in a way that would ensure maximum damage. But first, he needed Bradley to cross one final line. Vincent used his business connections to arrange a meeting with the City Planning Commission regarding the disputed development project. He made sure Diana knew about the meeting, understanding that she would immediately relay this information to Bradley. Then he set the trap. Working through intermediaries, Vincent arranged for a city planning official to hint that the development approval could be expedited for the right price. The official was actually an undercover FBI agent that Detective Kowalski had connected Vincent with, a man who had been working the construction corruption case for months. Bradley took the bait immediately. Within 48 hours, he had arranged a meeting to discuss bribing the planning official. The meeting would be recorded, photographed, and witnessed by federal agents. Bradley's crime would be captured in real time, providing irrefutable evidence of felony corruption. But Vincent wasn't finished. On the night before Bradley's planned bribery meeting, Vincent implemented the next phase of his plan: psychological warfare. He began leaving small signs that he knew about the affair. Diana's favorite coffee mug was moved slightly each morning. Her car keys were placed in different locations. Papers in his home office were rearranged in subtle ways that only someone with military training would notice, but that would create a growing sense of unease in anyone paying attention. Diana began to suspect that Vincent knew something, but she couldn't be certain. Her paranoia grew daily, making her sloppy and desperate. She started making mistakes, forgetting to clear her browser history, leaving incriminating text messages accessible, becoming careless in ways that provided Vincent with additional evidence. Meanwhile, Vincent maintained his facade of normalcy. He attended business dinners with Diana at his side, smiled for photographs at charity events, and played the role of the successful, devoted husband. But those who knew him best, Marcus, Amanda, and Ray, could see the predator lurking beneath the surface. The night before Bradley's planned meeting with the FBI agent, Vincent made his first direct move. He placed a single photograph on Diana's pillow, a picture of her kissing Bradley outside the luxury hotel where they conducted their affair. No note, no explanation, just undeniable proof that her secret was no longer secret. Diana found the photograph at midnight and immediately called Bradley in panic. Vincent listened to every word through the surveillance equipment Marcus had installed. Their conversation revealed the full scope of their plans. They intended to steal Vincent's biggest contract, use the profits to fund their new life together, and leave Vincent financially and emotionally destroyed. They had underestimated their target completely. As Vincent listened to his wife and her lover plan his destruction, he felt a calm settle over him that he recognized from his military days. It was the peace that came before violence, the clarity that preceded decisive action. Diana and Bradley had made their choice, and now they would face the consequences. Tomorrow, Bradley would walk into the FBI's trap and begin his journey toward federal prison. Tomorrow, Diana would discover that her perfect plan had been compromised from the beginning. And tomorrow, Vincent would begin the final phase of his revenge, a phase that would leave no survivors in its wake. But tonight, Vincent would go home, kiss his traitorous wife goodnight, and sleep soundly knowing that justice was finally within reach. Chapter 3: The Daughter's Gambit. Vincent's plan was progressing flawlessly when his 17-year-old daughter Amber made the mistake that would seal her fate alongside her mother's. It happened on a Thursday evening, 3 days after Diana had found the photograph and just hours before Bradley was scheduled to walk into the FBI's bribery trap. Vincent had returned home early from a deliberately scheduled meeting, timing his arrival to create maximum pressure on Diana's increasingly fragile composure. He found Amber in the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear, speaking in urgent whispers. "Mom's freaking out," Amber was saying. "Dad definitely knows something. She found some picture on her pillow. Yeah, I think you guys need to speed up whatever you're planning. Dad's not as stupid as you thought he was." Vincent stood in the doorway, listening to his daughter coordinate with Bradley Hutchins, the man who was systematically destroying his family and business. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Amber providing details about Vincent's schedule, his recent behavior changes, and suggestions for how Bradley and Diana could avoid detection. When Amber finally ended the call and turned around, she found her father standing behind her, his pale gray eyes locked on her face with an intensity that made her step backward. "Dad?" she stammered. "I didn't hear you come in." "Clearly," Vincent replied, his voice carrying the same quiet tone he had used when interrogating enemy combatants. That was an interesting conversation. Amber's face flushed red, then went pale as she realized exactly how much he might have heard. She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin in a gesture that reminded Vincent painfully of Diana's stubborn pride. "I don't know what you think you heard," Amber said, "but you're being paranoid. Mom's not doing anything wrong." Vincent studied his daughter's face, the face he had kissed goodnight for 17 years, the face that had smiled at him from soccer sidelines and graduation ceremonies, the face that now looked at him with barely concealed contempt. "Your mother is having an affair with Bradley Hutchins," Vincent said quietly. "They're planning to steal my business contracts and destroy everything I've built. And you've been helping them." Amber's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing shock and fear before she composed herself again. Then, to Vincent's amazement, she smiled, a cold, calculating expression that transformed her young face into something almost unrecognizable. "So what if I have?" she said. "Do you think I don't see how you treat Mom? How you ignore her for months at a time while you focus on your precious business? How you make her feel like a trophy wife instead of a real person?" Vincent felt something cold and final settle in his chest. "Your mother chose her path, Amber. I'm disappointed, but not surprised. But you're my daughter. I've given you everything. You've given me money," Amber shot back. "You've given me things. But you've never really seen me, have you? I'm just another asset to you, another investment in the Morrison family legacy." The words hit Vincent like physical blows, not because they were true, but because they revealed how completely he had failed to know his own child. The girl standing before him wasn't the daughter he thought he had raised. She was a stranger who had learned manipulation and betrayal at her mother's knee. "Bradley actually listens to me," Amber continued, her voice gaining confidence. "He treats me like an adult, like someone with valuable opinions. He's going to help me get into Columbia University's business program, and he's promised to give me an internship at his company. Mom and I will be fine without you." Vincent realized with crystalline clarity that Amber wasn't just complicit in the betrayal. She was an active participant who had chosen sides based on what she perceived as her best interests. She had calculated the value of her loyalty and found her father wanting. "I see," Vincent said softly. "And what exactly have you told Bradley about my business operations?" Amber hesitated for the first time, perhaps recognizing the dangerous territory she was entering. But her teenage arrogance overrode her caution. "Everything he needed to know," she said defiantly. "Your project schedules, your client lists, your bidding strategies. Bradley's twice the businessman you are, and he's going to prove it when he takes your biggest contract." Vincent nodded slowly, filing away this confession for future use. "Is there anything else you'd like to tell me, Amber? Any other ways you've betrayed your family?" "Betrayed?" Amber's voice rose sharply. "You betrayed us first. You cared more about your stupid company than your own family. Mom deserves better than you, and so do I." Vincent looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw Diana's influence in every gesture, every expression, every calculated word. Amber had been weaponized against him, turned into a tool of destruction by her own mother. But unlike Diana, Amber was still a minor, still legally his responsibility, still subject to his authority. That's when Amber made her final, fatal mistake. She stepped forward, her young face twisted with teenage rage and misplaced righteousness, and spat directly in Vincent's face. "You're a monster," she hissed. "A controlling, manipulative monster who destroys everything he touches. And no one will believe you if you try to blame this on Mom and me." Everyone knows you're the problem in this family. Vincent wiped the saliva from his cheek with deliberate slowness, his eyes never leaving Amber's face. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute finality. You don't know what you've started. Amber stared at him for a moment, perhaps finally recognizing that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. But her teenage bravado reasserted itself, and she lifted her chin defiantly. I know exactly what I've started, she said. I've started my real life, the one where I don't have to pretend to respect you anymore. Vincent turned and walked away without another word, leaving Amber standing alone in the kitchen. But as he climbed the stairs to his office, his mind was already working through the implications of what had just occurred. Amber had declared war on her own father. She had chosen to align herself with his enemies, had actively participated in his betrayal, and had just confessed to corporate espionage. More damaging still, she had revealed that she viewed herself as an adult capable of making her own choices and accepting their consequences. Vincent would honor that decision. That night, he sat in his office crafting a note that would change Amber's life forever. When he finished writing, he walked to her bedroom and slipped the paper under her door. The message was brief but comprehensive. Amber, your confession has been recorded and will be turned over to the FBI along with evidence of your participation in corporate espionage. You will be charged as an adult due to the nature and scope of your crimes. Bradley Hutchins will be arrested tomorrow morning on federal corruption charges. Your mother will be charged as an accessory to multiple felonies. Your college fund has been transferred to a victim's compensation account. You have 24 hours to pack your belongings and leave my house. Choose your allies carefully. They will be the only family you have left. Your former father. Vincent returned to his office and made 3 phone calls. The first was to Dr. Sterling, authorizing her to begin the financial transfers that would strip Diana of access to all family assets. The second was to Detective Kowalski, confirming that Bradley's arrest would proceed as planned. The third was to Marcus Webb, activating the final phase of Vincent's revenge plan. By morning, the Morrison family would cease to exist. Diana and Bradley would be facing federal charges that would destroy their careers and send them to prison. Amber would discover that choices have consequences, and that betraying family carries the highest price of all. Vincent poured himself a whiskey and settled into his chair to wait for dawn. Tomorrow would bring the reckoning that Diana, Bradley, and Amber had earned through their own actions. And Vincent Morrison, the man they had foolishly attempted to destroy, would emerge victorious from the wreckage of their ambitions. The war they had started was about to end, and Vincent never lost a war. Chapter 4. The Web Titans. Dawn broke over Chicago with the precision of a military operation, and Vincent Morrison was ready for battle. He had spent the early morning hours finalizing the details that would bring his enemy's world crashing down around them. By 6 a.m., he was dressed in his finest suit, appearing every inch the successful businessman about to attend routine meetings. No one who saw him would suspect that he was orchestrating the systematic destruction of everyone who had betrayed him. The first domino fell at exactly 8:30 a.m. when FBI agents arrested Bradley Hutchins at his office. The arrest was captured by news crews that Detective Kowalski had discreetly alerted, ensuring that Bradley's humiliation would be broadcast across Chicago's business community. The charges were comprehensive: federal bribery, conspiracy, mail fraud, and money laundering. Each count carried a potential sentence of 20 years in federal prison. Vincent watched the arrest from his office conference room, surrounded by his key employees who believed they were attending a routine project meeting. Marcus Webb sat at Vincent's right hand, his scarred face showing no emotion as he observed their employer's victory. Dr. Sterling attended via video conference, her financial documents spread across the table like battle plans. Bradley Hutchins has been effectively neutralized, Dr. Sterling reported in her clinical tone. His assets are frozen pending investigation, his business accounts are under federal control, and his clients are already beginning to terminate their contracts. Hutchins' development will be bankrupt within 72 hours. Vincent nodded, but his expression remained neutral. What about the civil aspects? I've filed preliminary injunctions against both Hutchins and your wife for theft of proprietary information, Dr. Sterling continued. The evidence of corporate espionage is overwhelming. Diana's involvement is documented through phone records, email communications, and financial transactions. She accepted gifts purchased with stolen funds, making her an accessory to federal crimes. The second domino fell at 10:15 a.m. when Vincent's attorney served Diana with divorce papers, restraining orders, and a civil lawsuit seeking damages for corporate espionage. The papers were delivered by a process server who found Diana at her favorite spa, surrounded by friends who witnessed her humiliation as she was presented with documents that would destroy her social standing. Vincent received confirmation of service while reviewing architectural plans for a new project, plans that Bradley would never see, contracts that Diana would never influence, profits that would never fund their betrayal. But the psychological warfare was just beginning. At noon, Vincent activated Marcus Webb's network of former military and law enforcement personnel. These men, all loyal to Vincent personally, began a campaign of subtle intimidation designed to isolate Diana and demonstrate the reach of Vincent's influence. Diana's hairdresser suddenly developed scheduling conflicts that prevented future appointments. Her personal trainer discovered insurance issues that required canceling her sessions. The manager of her favorite restaurant found reasons to revoke her membership in their exclusive dining club. One by one, the services and relationships that defined Diana's lifestyle began disappearing without explanation. Meanwhile, Amber Morrison was discovering that teenage rebellion carried adult consequences. Vincent had instructed his attorney to file a motion declaring Amber an emancipated minor, effectively severing all legal and financial ties between father and daughter. Her college fund had been transferred to a victim's compensation account as promised, her credit cards had been canceled, and her access to family resources had been terminated. More damaging to Amber's immediate circumstances, Vincent had shared evidence of her participation in corporate espionage with the FBI. While her age might protect her from federal prosecution, it would not shield her from civil liability or social consequences. At 2 p.m., Amber called her father's office in desperation. Vincent's secretary, Mrs. Patterson, handled the call with professional courtesy. "Mr. Morrison is unavailable," Mrs. Patterson reported. "However, he asked me to inform you that all future communications should go through his attorney. The contact information is included in the documents you received last night. Tell him I need to talk to him," Amber pleaded. "Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I didn't understand what I was doing." Mrs. Patterson's response was delivered in the same neutral tone. "Mr. Morrison also asked me to remind you that adults are responsible for the consequences of their choices. He wishes you the best of luck in your new, independent life." The call ended there, leaving Amber alone to contemplate the reality of her situation. She had allied herself with Bradley Hutchins, who was now in federal custody. She had betrayed her father, who had disowned her completely. She had chosen independence, and Vincent was ensuring she experienced its full weight. But Vincent's most devastating move came at 4 p.m., when he held a press conference announcing Morrison Construction's expansion into luxury residential development. The announcement seemed routine, just another successful businessman growing his empire. But every detail had been calculated for maximum psychological impact on his enemies. Vincent stood before the assembled media, flanked by architectural renderings of the exact project that Bradley had tried to steal. The development would be built on schedule, using Vincent's original plans, generating the profits that Diana and Bradley had attempted to claim for themselves. Morrison Construction has always been built on principles of integrity, loyalty, and family values, Vincent told the reporters. "We've recently discovered that some individuals attempted to compromise those principles through corporate espionage and fraud. We're pleased to report that these threats have been neutralized, and justice is being served." The questions from reporters focused on the corruption charges against Bradley, but Vincent deflected them professionally while ensuring that Diana's involvement would be implied rather than explicitly stated. He understood that suggestion could be more damaging than accusation, allowing people to draw their own conclusions about the failed marriage of Vincent Morrison. As the press conference ended, Vincent received a text message from Detective Kowalski. "Diana just left the spa. She's driving toward your office." Vincent smiled for the first time that day. Diana was coming to confront him directly, exactly as he had anticipated. She would arrive emotional, desperate, and unprepared for the conversation that would end their marriage permanently. Vincent instructed Mrs. Patterson to clear his schedule and activate the recording system in his office. This final confrontation would be documented for posterity and for future legal proceedings. At 5:30 p.m., Diana Morrison arrived at her husband's office building. Security cameras captured her entering the lobby, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. She wore a black dress that Vincent had bought her for their 15th anniversary, diamond earrings he had given her for Christmas, and an expression that promised a battle she had no hope of winning. Vincent waited in his office, surrounded by the empire he had built through his own talent and determination. The walls displayed photographs of construction projects, military commendations, and business achievements that represented 20 years of disciplined effort. Diana was about to enter his domain, where he held every advantage and controlled every variable. When Mrs. Patterson announced Diana's arrival, Vincent instructed her to send his wife up immediately. Then he activated the recording system and prepared to deliver the final blow in a war that Diana had started, but Vincent would finish. The elevator doors opened, and Diana Morrison stepped into her husband's office for the last time. The conversation that followed would determine the terms of her surrender and the scope of her destruction. Vincent had spent months preparing for this moment, and he was ready to claim total victory. Diana thought she was coming to negotiate or intimidate her husband into submission. She had no idea that she was walking into the execution of a plan that would leave her with nothing except the knowledge that she had destroyed herself through her own choices. The end game was about to begin, and Vincent Morrison never showed mercy to his enemies. Chapter 5: Confrontation and Revelation. Diana Morrison entered her husband's office like a queen entering a conquered territory, her chin raised in defiance and her emerald eyes blazing with carefully controlled fury. She moved with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention at charity galas and business functions, but Vincent noticed the slight tremor in her hands and the tension around her eyes that betrayed her underlying desperation. "Vincent," she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority she typically reserved for household staff. "We need to discuss this misunderstanding before it goes any further." Vincent remained seated behind his desk, studying his wife with the same clinical detachment he had once used to assess enemy positions. Diana looked beautiful even in her anger. The black dress accentuated her figure perfectly. Her makeup was flawless despite the stress of the day, and her bearing suggested confidence despite the circumstances. She was performing brilliantly, but Vincent could see through the facade to the fear beneath. "Please, sit down," Vincent said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I've been expecting you." Diana remained standing, perhaps recognizing that sitting would put her at a psychological disadvantage. "The charges against Bradley are ridiculous," she began, launching into what was clearly a rehearsed speech. "He's a legitimate businessman who was entrapped by federal agents. His arrest is part of a broader investigation that has nothing to do with our family." Vincent listened without interruption, noting how Diana positioned herself as innocent while simultaneously defending her lover. She was skilled at manipulation, but she was playing a game where Vincent already knew all the moves. "As for this divorce filing," Diana continued, her voice gaining strength, "it's clearly an emotional reaction to false information. We can work through whatever problems you think we have. Marriage counseling, a vacation, whatever you need to realize that our family is worth preserving." "Our family," Vincent repeated quietly. "Tell me, Diana, what exactly do you consider our family?" The question seemed to confuse her momentarily. "You, me, and Amber, of course. The three of us have built something important together. We have a reputation in this community, business relationships that depend on stability, a daughter who needs both of her parents." Vincent opened his desk drawer and withdrew a thick manila folder. "I've spent considerable time over the past few months learning about our family," he said, placing the folder on his desk. "Would you like to see what I discovered?" Diana's composure slipped slightly as she recognized the investigative materials. Her eyes darted to the folder, then back to Vincent's face, calculating her options. "I don't know what lies someone has told you," she said carefully, "but private investigators can be paid to fabricate evidence. Whatever you think you know, we can prove it's false." Vincent opened the folder and withdrew a series of photographs. He placed them on the desk facing Diana, creating a timeline of her affair with Bradley Hutchins. The images were crystal clear: Diana and Bradley entering hotel rooms, sharing intimate dinners, exchanging documents in parking lots, kissing in Bradley's office. These photographs were taken over a period of 6 months, Vincent said in the same conversational tone he might use to discuss weather. They document not just your sexual relationship with Bradley, but your systematic theft of my business information. Diana stared at the photographs, her face cycling through shock, anger, and calculation before settling on cold determination. When she looked up at Vincent, her mask had completely fallen away, revealing the calculating woman beneath. "Fine," she said, her voice now carrying an edge of steel. "Yes, I've been seeing Bradley. Yes, we've discussed business opportunities. But that doesn't make me a criminal, Vincent. It makes me a woman who was neglected by her husband and found comfort elsewhere." Vincent admired her recovery, even as he prepared to destroy it completely. "Comfort," he repeated. "Is that what you call corporate espionage?" "I call it survival," Diana shot back, finally moving to sit across from his desk. "Do you know what it's like being married to you, Vincent? You disappear for 12 hours a day building your empire, then come home and expect me to smile and play the perfect wife. You treat me like a business asset, not a partner." "A partner," Vincent said, pulling out additional documents, "shares information honestly. A partner doesn't steal proprietary information to give to competitors. A partner doesn't coordinate with their lover to destroy their spouse's business." Diana's eyes narrowed as she recognized financial records and communication logs. "You've been spying on me." "I've been protecting my business," Vincent corrected. "And I discovered that my wife and daughter have been conspiring to destroy everything I've built." The mention of Amber seemed to hit Diana like a physical blow. "Leave Amber out of this. She's just a child who got caught in the middle of adult problems." Vincent leaned forward, his gray eyes locking onto Diana's with predatory intensity. "Amber confessed to providing Bradley with confidential information about my business operations. She admitted to helping coordinate your affair and lying to cover your tracks. She chose to participate in your betrayal, Diana. She chose to help you destroy her own father." Diana's composure finally cracked completely. "You bastard," she screamed, jumping to her feet. "You drove us to this. Your obsession with control, your need to dominate everyone around you, your complete inability to see anyone else as a real person." Vincent remained perfectly calm as Diana's fury erupted around him. He had anticipated this emotional breakdown and was prepared to use it against her. "Bradley sees me as a real person," Diana continued, tears now streaming down her face. "He values my intelligence, my opinions, my contributions. He doesn't treat me like a decorative object or a business expense." "Bradley is facing 20 years in federal prison," Vincent said quietly. "His business is bankrupt, his assets are frozen, and his wife is filing for divorce. Is that the future you chose over your marriage?" Diana stared at him in stunned silence, perhaps finally understanding the scope of her miscalculation. "You want to know what Bradley really thought of you?" Vincent continued, withdrawing a transcript from his folder. "This is a recording of a conversation between Bradley and his business partner from 3 weeks ago." He read from the transcript in a neutral tone. "Diana Morrison is useful but disposable. Once we steal Vincent's contracts and tank his business, we won't need her anymore. She's too high maintenance and too visible. Better to cut ties cleanly and let Vincent deal with the wreckage." Diana's face went white as the words hit her. "That's not. Bradley wouldn't. Bradley was using you exactly the way you thought you were using me," Vincent said. "The difference is that I actually loved you, Diana. I built this empire partially for you, partially for our daughter. Bradley built nothing except plans to discard you once you were no longer useful." The revelation destroyed what remained of Diana's defiance. She collapsed back into her chair, her perfect composure shattered beyond repair. "What do you want, Vincent?" she whispered. "What will it take for you to forgive this?" Vincent studied his wife's broken form and felt absolutely nothing. No sympathy, no regret, no desire for reconciliation. The woman who had shared his bed for 15 years had become a stranger the moment she chose to betray him. "Forgiveness isn't possible," he said simply. "You've stolen from me, lied to me, and corrupted our daughter. You've allied yourself with my enemies and attempted to destroy everything I've worked to build. There is no path back from those choices." Diana looked up at him with desperate eyes. "But we could start over. We could rebuild. People make mistakes, Vincent. Even terrible mistakes can be forgiven." Vincent shook his head slowly. "You didn't make a mistake, Diana. You made a calculated decision to betray your family for personal gain. You planned this betrayal for over a year, involved our daughter in your scheme, and felt no remorse until you got caught. He stood and walked to his office window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Tomorrow, you'll be formally charged as an accessory to Bradley's crimes. Your social reputation will be destroyed when the details become public. Your access to our assets has been terminated, and our daughter has been legally emancipated. Vincent turned back to face Diana, who was staring at him with a mixture of shock and growing horror. You chose Bradley over me, he continued. You chose betrayal over loyalty. You chose to destroy our family rather than communicate your concerns. Now you'll live with the consequences of those choices. Diana stood on unsteady legs, her designer dress wrinkled and her makeup ruined by tears. You're destroying your own daughter along with me. Is your revenge worth that price? Vincent's expression never changed. Amber chose her side in this war. She declared herself an adult capable of making her own decisions. I'm simply honoring that declaration. Diana stared at her husband for a long moment, perhaps finally recognizing that she was looking at someone she had never really known. The man who had loved her, protected her, and built an empire to secure her future was gone, replaced by someone who viewed her with the same cold calculation he might show a business competitor. I never knew you could be this cruel, she whispered. You never knew me at all, Vincent replied. If you had, you never would have attempted this betrayal. Diana walked toward the elevator on unsteady legs, her perfect posture finally broken. At the door, she turned back one final time. What about the 15 years we had together? What about the good times, the love we shared, the life we built? Vincent considered her question seriously before answering. Those 15 years were built on a foundation I thought was solid. You proved it was sand. Everything that came before is meaningless now, Diana. All that matters is what happens next. The elevator doors closed on Diana Morrison for the last time, leaving Vincent alone in his office with the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. Phase 2 of his revenge was complete, and Diana now understood the true cost of her betrayal. But Vincent wasn't finished. Tomorrow would bring the final phase of his plan, the phase that would ensure his enemies never had the opportunity to threaten him again. Diana and Bradley had started a war they couldn't win. Now Vincent would finish it on his terms, with the complete and total victory that his enemies had made inevitable through their own choices. Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. The 24 hours following Diana's confrontation with Vincent marked the complete transformation of the Morrison family from Chicago's golden couple into a cautionary tale of betrayal and revenge. News of Bradley's arrest had spread through the city's business community like wildfire, carrying with it whispered speculation about the involvement of his married lover and her prominent construction executive husband. Vincent began his morning by reviewing intelligence reports from Marcus Webb, whose network had maintained surveillance on both Diana and Amber throughout the night. The results confirmed Vincent's predictions about how his enemies would respond to pressure. Diana had spent the night at a luxury hotel, using credit cards that would be frozen within hours once Vincent's attorney filed additional motions. She had made 17 phone calls to Bradley's cell phone, none of which were answered due to his federal custody status. Her final call had been to her sister in Milwaukee, a conversation that Marcus's technical surveillance had captured in its entirety. Everything's falling apart, Diana had sobbed into the phone. Vincent knows everything. Bradley's been arrested, and I think I'm going to be charged as an accomplice. I need somewhere to stay while I figure out what to do. Her sister's response had been predictably cold. Diana, you made this mess yourself. David and I can't risk our reputation by harboring someone involved in federal crimes. You need to find another solution. Even Diana's own family was abandoning her as the scope of her situation became clear. Vincent felt no sympathy for her isolation. She had chosen to burn bridges when she thought she didn't need them anymore. Amber's response to her emancipation had been equally predictable but more dangerous. According to Marcus's reports, she had contacted several of her wealthy friends' families, attempting to arrange temporary housing. When those efforts failed, Vincent's reputation in their social circle made harboring his daughter a risky proposition. Amber had resorted to more desperate measures. At 3 a.m., she had attempted to break into Vincent's home office using her mother's key codes. The security system had detected her intrusion immediately, triggering silent alarms that alerted both Vincent and his security team. Cameras captured Amber searching through confidential documents, apparently looking for information she could use to bargain with her father or sell to Vincent's competitors. Vincent watched the security footage with clinical interest, noting how Amber moved through his office with practiced familiarity. She knew exactly where he kept his most sensitive files, understood his organizational system, and demonstrated a level of preparation that indicated she had been planning this theft for some time. The attempted burglary represented a criminal escalation that moved Amber beyond the protection her age might have provided. She was no longer a misguided teenager caught in her parents' dysfunction. She was an active criminal participant in the ongoing conspiracy against Vincent's business. Vincent made 3 phone calls before 6 a.m. The first was to Detective Kowalski, reporting the break-in and providing video evidence of Amber's attempted theft. The second was to his attorney, authorizing the filing of criminal charges against his daughter for burglary and attempted corporate espionage. The third was to Dr. Sterling, instructing her to implement the final phase of his financial strategy. By noon, Amber Morrison would be wanted by Chicago police for multiple felonies. Her transformation from privileged teenager to federal fugitive would be complete, demonstrating to anyone watching that Vincent Morrison showed no mercy to those who betrayed him, not even his own blood. But Vincent's most devastating move was yet to come. At 10 a.m., he called a meeting with Morrison Construction's senior staff and key investors. The conference room filled with the men and women who had helped build Vincent's empire, all of them loyal and all of them aware that their leader was facing personal challenges that could impact the business. Vincent entered the room wearing his best suit and carrying himself with the confidence of a general addressing his troops before a decisive battle. The assembled group included project managers, financial officers, and major investors who represented millions of dollars in committed capital. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Vincent began, standing at the head of the polished conference table. "As you're aware, recent events have created some challenges for our organization. I want to address those challenges directly and explain how we're moving forward." He activated the room's presentation system and displayed a financial summary that Dr. Sterling had prepared overnight. The numbers showed Morrison Construction's position in stark terms. The company was stronger than ever, with project backlogs extending 18 months into the future and profit margins exceeding industry standards. Despite attempts by competitors to steal our proprietary information and damage our reputation, Vincent continued, "Morrison Construction has not only survived but thrived. Our security protocols worked exactly as designed, protecting our intellectual property and preventing any actual damage to our operations." The presentation continued with evidence of how Vincent's intelligence gathering had actually strengthened the company's position. Bradley's arrest had eliminated a major competitor, Diana's banishment had removed a security vulnerability, and the publicity surrounding the corruption investigation had enhanced Morrison Construction's reputation for integrity. However, Vincent said, his tone becoming more serious, "These events have made it clear that personal relationships can pose security risks to business operations. Going forward, Morrison Construction will implement enhanced security protocols and background checks for anyone with access to sensitive information." The new policies Vincent outlined were comprehensive and ruthless. Family members would be subject to the same security screenings as business partners. Personal relationships would be monitored for potential conflicts of interest. Any violation of confidentiality agreements would result in immediate termination and criminal prosecution. Vincent's message was clear. Loyalty would be rewarded, but betrayal would be met with total destruction, regardless of personal relationships or family connections. After the meeting concluded, Vincent received a call from Detective Kowalski confirming that Amber had been arrested at a friend's house. She had resisted arrest and was charged with additional offenses, including obstruction of justice and assault on a police officer. Her bail had been set at $50,000, money she no longer had access to. Diana's situation had deteriorated just as rapidly. Federal prosecutors had filed charges against her for conspiracy and accessory to fraud, with her court appearance scheduled for the following morning. Her attorney, paid for with funds that would soon be frozen, had advised her that cooperation with authorities might reduce her sentence from the potential 15 years she was facing. By evening, Vincent stood in his empty house reviewing the complete destruction of his enemies. Bradley Hutchins was in federal custody, facing decades in prison. Diana was financially ruined and criminally charged, abandoned by her lover, her family, and her social circle. Amber was in county jail, learning that adult choices carried adult consequences. Vincent poured himself a whiskey and walked through rooms that had once housed a family, but now contained only memories of a life built on lies. Diana's belongings remained where she had left them, but they would be removed within days as part of the divorce proceedings. Amber's room looked like any teenager's space, but the girl who had lived there no longer existed. She had been replaced by a criminal who had chosen to make herself Vincent's enemy. As Vincent stood in his office, surrounded by the empire he had built and successfully defended, he felt the deep satisfaction of a mission accomplished. He had identified threats to everything he valued, planned their destruction with military precision, and executed that plan without mercy or hesitation. The war Diana and Bradley had started was over. Vincent Morrison had achieved total victory, demonstrating to anyone who might threaten him in the future that he was not a man to be crossed, betrayed, or underestimated. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. Vincent would rebuild his personal life on a foundation of loyalty and honesty, surrounded by people who understood the value of integrity. He would expand his business empire, secure in the knowledge that his security protocols could protect against any threat. But tonight, Vincent Morrison stood alone in his fortress, the undisputed victor in a war that had cost his enemies everything they valued. He had proven that betrayal carried a price his enemies could never afford to pay, and that Vincent Morrison never forgave those who chose to become his enemies. The price of betraying Vincent Morrison had been demonstrated for all to see. It was a lesson that would not need to be taught again. Chapter 7. The Fall of Kings. 6 months after the destruction of his family, Vincent Morrison had rebuilt his life with the same methodical precision he brought to military operations and business ventures. The Morrison family scandal had become legend in Chicago's business community, a cautionary tale about the consequences of betraying a man who understood both strategy and vengeance. Vincent's morning routine began at 5 a.m. in the private gym he had installed in his penthouse apartment downtown. The house where he had lived with Diana and Amber had been sold immediately after the divorce finalization, with the proceeds flowing directly into Morrison Construction's expansion fund. Vincent had no desire to live among the memories of people who had proven themselves unworthy of his trust. His new residence occupied the top floor of a building he owned, providing both luxury and security that reflected his current priorities. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the Chicago skyline, while military-grade security systems ensured that no one could threaten him in his own domain. Marcus Webb arrived at 6 a.m. with intelligence reports that had become Vincent's preferred method of staying informed about his former enemies' continuing destruction. The updates were delivered with the efficiency of military briefings, focusing on facts rather than emotions. Bradley Hutchins was sentenced yesterday, Marcus reported, settling into the chair across from Vincent's breakfast table. 12 years federal prison, no possibility of parole for 8 years. His attorney tried to argue for reduced sentencing based on cooperation, but the judge wasn't impressed. Vincent nodded as he reviewed the financial documents Dr. Sterling had prepared overnight. Bradley's complete financial ruin had been even more thorough than originally planned. His wife had divorced him and taken custody of their children. His business had been liquidated to pay legal fees, and his reputation in the development industry had been permanently destroyed. What about his family? Vincent asked, though his interest was purely tactical rather than sympathetic. His ex-wife moved back to her parents in Connecticut with the kids, Marcus continued. She had to sell their house, liquidate their savings, and declare bankruptcy to cover the legal costs. The children are enrolled in public school after spending their lives in private academies. Vincent felt no satisfaction in the suffering of innocent children, but he understood that Bradley's choices had consequences that extended beyond himself. The man who had attempted to destroy Vincent's family had succeeded in destroying his own instead. Diana's situation has stabilized somewhat, Marcus continued, consulting his notes. She pled guilty to federal conspiracy charges and received 3 years probation in exchange for testimony against Bradley. She's living in a studio apartment in Milwaukee, working as a retail clerk at a department store. The transformation of Diana Morrison from social queen to minimum wage worker was complete and irreversible. Her designer wardrobe had been sold to pay legal fees. Her social connections had evaporated once her crimes became public, and her future prospects were limited by her felony conviction. She's attempted to contact you several times through intermediaries, Marcus added. Letters delivered through your attorney, messages passed through mutual acquaintances, even an attempted approach through Mrs. Patterson, all requesting some form of reconciliation or financial assistance. Vincent's response was always the same: absolute silence. Diana had made her choice when she chose to betray him, and Vincent honored that choice by treating her as if she no longer existed. There would be no second chances, no forgiveness, and no mercy for someone who had proven herself to be an enemy. And Amber? Vincent asked, though he already knew the answer would be equally devastating. Marcus's expression grew more serious. She's been in and out of county jail 6 times since her initial arrest. Drug possession, shoplifting, assault charges. Her public defender keeps trying to argue that she's a troubled teenager acting out due to family trauma, but the judges aren't buying it anymore. Amber Morrison had discovered that the real world was unforgiving to privileged teenagers who attempted to survive through crime and manipulation. Without access to her father's money or protection, she had quickly fallen into patterns of behavior that led inevitably to repeated arrests and convictions. She aged out of the juvenile system 2 months ago, Marcus continued. Her next arrest will be prosecuted as an adult, and she's already facing enhanced sentencing due to her repeat offender status. The state prosecutor has indicated that she's looking at serious prison time if this pattern continues. Vincent felt no emotion as he absorbed this information about the girl who had once been his daughter. Amber had chosen to align herself with his enemies, had confessed to betraying him, and had attempted to steal from him even after being given the opportunity to leave peacefully. Her subsequent criminal behavior simply confirmed that Vincent's assessment of her character had been accurate. Any attempts at contact from her? Vincent asked. Multiple attempts, Marcus confirmed. Phone calls from jail, letters sent through various intermediaries, even an attempt to approach you directly outside the office building last month. Security turned her away before she could get close. Vincent's security protocols had been enhanced significantly since the family's destruction. His movements were monitored by former military personnel, his communication channels were protected against surveillance, and his personal safety was guaranteed by people who understood loyalty and had proven their reliability through years of service. At 8 a.m., Vincent arrived at Morrison Construction's headquarters, where his empire continued to expand at an unprecedented rate. The scandal surrounding his family's betrayal had actually enhanced his business reputation, demonstrating that Vincent Morrison was someone who could be trusted to protect sensitive information and punish those who violated that trust. Dr. Sterling was waiting in his office with quarterly financial reports that showed Morrison Construction's continued dominance in Chicago's luxury development market. The contracts that Bradley had attempted to steal were now generating massive profits, funding expansion into new markets and acquisition of smaller competitors. We've received 3 new acquisition offers this week, Dr. Sterling reported, spreading documents across Vincent's desk. Companies that want to be purchased by Morrison Construction specifically because of your reputation for security and reliability. Vincent's handling of the family crisis had become a business asset, proving to potential partners that he could be trusted with confidential information and would respond to betrayal with overwhelming force. His enemies' attempt to destroy him had instead made him stronger and more successful than ever before. What about the federal prosecutors? Vincent asked. Any indication that their investigation is expanding beyond Bradley and Diana? The investigation concluded last month with Bradley's sentencing, Dr. Sterling confirmed. Federal agents interviewed you twice as a victim of corporate espionage, and your cooperation was noted favorably in their final report. You're viewed as someone who helped expose corruption rather than participate in it. Vincent's strategic cooperation with federal authorities had been calculated to position him as a victim and hero rather than a vengeful husband. His evidence against Bradley and Diana had been presented as civic duty rather than personal revenge, creating a narrative that enhanced his reputation while destroying his enemies. At 2 p.m., Vincent received an unexpected visitor when Detective Kowalski arrived at his office with a proposal that would bring the final chapter of his revenge to completion. We've got a situation that might interest you, Kowalski said, settling into the chair across from Vincent's desk. Amber's been arrested again, but this time it's different. She's been caught dealing drugs near a high school, enough heroin to qualify for federal trafficking charges. Vincent listened with clinical interest as Kowalski explained the details of Amber's latest arrest. Her desperation had led her to increasingly serious crimes, culminating in drug dealing that could result in a prison sentence measured in decades rather than months. The federal prosecutor wants to make an example of her, Kowalski continued. Rich kid from a prominent family selling drugs to teenagers. It's the kind of case that gets attention and sends a message about equal justice. Vincent considered the implications of Amber's situation. His former daughter was about to face the same federal justice system that had destroyed Bradley and Diana, but her crimes were entirely of her own making. Vincent had played no role in her decision to become a drug dealer. That was a choice she had made independently as her life spiraled out of control. What exactly are you proposing? Vincent asked. Kowalski leaned forward, his expression serious. The prosecutor wants character witnesses for Amber's sentencing hearing. People who can speak to her background, her potential for rehabilitation, the circumstances that led to her criminal behavior. Vincent understood immediately what Kowalski was suggesting. As Amber's father, Vincent could potentially influence her sentencing through testimony about her upbringing, her character, and the family trauma that had contributed to her current situation. I could testify that she's a troubled young woman who made mistakes due to family dysfunction, Kowalski continued. Or I could testify that she's a repeat offender who has shown no remorse for her criminal behavior and poses a continuing threat to public safety. The choice was Vincent's. He could show mercy to the daughter who had betrayed him, or he could ensure that her destruction was as complete and permanent as her mother's and Bradley's. Vincent stood and walked to his office window, looking out at the city where his enemies had fallen one by one through their own choices and actions. Diana was working retail jobs to survive. Bradley was beginning a 12-year prison sentence, and Amber was facing the possibility of spending her 20s and 30s in federal prison. The war they had started was ending exactly as Vincent had planned, with their complete and total defeat. But this final decision would determine whether Vincent Morrison was remembered as a man who destroyed his enemies or as a father who had abandoned his own child. When Vincent turned back to face Detective Kowalski, his decision was already made. The girl who had spat in his face and declared herself his enemy would face the consequences of her choices without any assistance from the father she had betrayed. Schedule me to testify for the prosecution, Vincent said quietly. The court should know exactly what kind of person they're sentencing. Kowalski nodded, perhaps not surprised by Vincent's choice, but understanding its finality. Amber Morrison would face federal drug trafficking charges without any protection from the father whose love she had rejected, whose trust she had violated, and whose enemies she had chosen to become. The destruction of Vincent Morrison's betrayers was about to be complete and irreversible. The war was ending with total victory for the man who had never shown mercy to those who chose to become his enemies. Chapter 8. The Final Judgment. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago had become a temple of justice, where Vincent Morrison's enemies came to face the consequences of their betrayal. As Vincent entered the building for Amber's sentencing hearing, he carried himself with the bearing of a successful businessman attending a routine legal proceeding, showing no emotion that might suggest personal investment in the outcome. 3 weeks had passed since Vincent agreed to testify against his former daughter, and those weeks had been filled with careful preparation designed to ensure that justice would be both swift and thorough. Vincent's testimony would be the final blow in a campaign that had systematically destroyed everyone who had chosen to betray him. The courtroom was packed with journalists, legal observers, and social workers who had followed Amber's descent from privileged teenager to federal defendant. Her case had attracted attention as an example of how quickly young people could fall into serious criminal behavior, making Vincent's testimony particularly significant for the judge's sentencing decision. Amber sat at the defendant's table wearing an orange jumpsuit that marked her as a convicted felon awaiting sentencing. She had lost significant weight during her incarceration, and her once perfect appearance had been replaced by the hollow-eyed look of someone who had discovered that real consequences existed in the adult world. When Amber saw Vincent enter the courtroom, her eyes filled with tears, and she mouthed the word "Daddy" in a desperate plea for recognition. Vincent looked directly at her for several seconds, memorizing the face of the girl who had once been his daughter, then took his seat in the witness section without any acknowledgement of her presence. The message was clear. Vincent Morrison no longer recognized Amber as his child, and she would face her fate as a stranger who had chosen to become his enemy. Federal prosecutor Sarah Martinez had built her career on cases involving white-collar crime and had specifically requested Vincent's testimony to demonstrate that Amber's criminal behavior represented calculated choices rather than youthful mistakes. Martinez understood that Vincent's reputation for integrity would lend credibility to her argument for maximum sentencing. Your Honor, Martinez began her opening statement. The defendant before you is not the troubled teenager her defense attorney will portray. She is a repeat offender who has escalated from juvenile infractions to serious federal crimes, demonstrating a pattern of criminal behavior that poses a genuine threat to public safety. Amber's court-appointed defense attorney, Patricia Wong, had tried desperately to build a case for leniency based on family trauma and psychological damage. Her client interview notes showed that Amber had finally begun to understand the scope of her mistakes, but Wong knew that remorse expressed only after conviction would carry little weight with federal judges. The defense will argue that Ms. Morrison is a victim of circumstances beyond her control, Wong countered in her opening statement. A young woman whose family dissolved in scandal, leaving her without guidance or support during crucial developmental years. Vincent listened to both attorneys with clinical interest, noting how they positioned Amber's choices within different narratives. Martinez emphasized personal responsibility and criminal intent, while Wong focused on victimization and rehabilitation potential. Both narratives contained elements of truth, but only one would determine Amber's fate. When Vincent was called to testify, he walked to the witness stand with the confidence of someone who had testified in military tribunals and congressional hearings. His appearance was immaculate, a charcoal suit that conveyed both success and respectability, while his bearing suggested someone accustomed to speaking truth regardless of personal cost. Mr. Morrison, Prosecutor Martinez began, please state your relationship to the defendant. Vincent looked directly at Amber as he answered. Amber Morrison was my daughter until she chose to participate in criminal conspiracy against my business and family. At that point, our relationship was legally terminated through emancipation proceedings. The courtroom stirred at Vincent's clinical description of disowning his own child, but his expression never changed. He was presenting facts rather than emotions, allowing the court to understand that his testimony was based on evidence rather than paternal feelings. Can you describe the defendant's character and behavior prior to her arrest? Martinez continued. Vincent's testimony was devastating in its precision and completeness. He described Amber's participation in corporate espionage, her confession to betraying confidential information, her attempted burglary of his office, and her declaration that she viewed herself as an adult capable of making independent choices. The defendant informed me that she no longer wished to be treated as a child, Vincent testified. She expressed contempt for my authority and aligned herself with individuals who were actively working to destroy my business and family. When I honored her request for independence, she responded by attempting to steal confidential information from my office. Amber's defense attorney tried to object to Vincent's characterization of events, but federal judges allowed considerable latitude in character testimony. Wong's interruptions only served to emphasize how damaging Vincent's testimony was becoming for her client. Mr. Morrison, Martinez continued, has the defendant shown any remorse for her criminal behavior or attempted to make amends for the damage she caused? Vincent consulted notes he had prepared specifically for this question. Since her emancipation, the defendant has been arrested 6 times for various offenses. She has made multiple attempts to contact me requesting money, legal assistance, and housing. At no point has she expressed remorse for her criminal behavior or accepted responsibility for the consequences of her choices. The testimony painted a picture of Amber as someone who viewed crime as acceptable when it served her purposes and who sought assistance only when facing consequences for her actions. Vincent's clinical recitation of facts made it impossible for the court to view Amber as a victim rather than a perpetrator. In your opinion, Martinez asked, does the defendant pose a continuing threat to public safety? Vincent paused for a moment, as if considering his answer carefully rather than delivering a prepared response. The defendant has demonstrated a pattern of escalating criminal behavior when faced with adversity. Her response to personal challenges has been to commit increasingly serious crimes rather than seek legitimate solutions. I believe she will continue this pattern unless faced with consequences severe enough to modify her behavior permanently. The final blow came when Martinez asked Vincent about Amber's potential for rehabilitation. Mr. Morrison, do you believe the defendant can be successfully rehabilitated through counseling or community service? Vincent looked directly at Amber one final time before answering. The defendant had every advantage in life: education, financial security, family support, and unlimited opportunities. She chose to betray the people who loved her and commit crimes against innocent victims. Someone who makes those choices despite having every reason to make better ones is unlikely to be reformed by programs designed for people who lacked her advantages. When Vincent's testimony concluded, Amber was openly weeping at the defendant's table. Her defense attorney's subsequent arguments about family trauma and rehabilitation potential seemed weak and unconvincing after Vincent's systematic destruction of her character. Judge Patricia Rodriguez had presided over hundreds of drug cases and understood the difference between young people who made mistakes and those who chose criminal lifestyles. Vincent's testimony had clearly established that Amber fell into the latter category, making harsh sentencing not just appropriate, but necessary. Ms. Morrison, Judge Rodriguez said as she prepared to announce the sentence, "You have been convicted of federal drug trafficking charges that carry serious penalties. The court has considered your age, your background, and the testimony regarding your character and potential for rehabilitation." Amber stood to face her sentence, her orange jumpsuit hanging loosely on her diminished frame. She looked toward Vincent one final time, perhaps hoping for some sign of paternal mercy, but found only the cold gaze of a man who viewed her as a stranger. "The court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation," Judge Rodriguez announced. "You will serve your sentence at Federal Correctional Institution Danbury, a facility equipped to provide educational and rehabilitation programs for young offenders." Amber collapsed at the defendant's table as the weight of her sentence became clear. 8 years in federal prison would take her from age 19 to 27, destroying any possibility of the privileged life she had once expected. By the time she was released, Vincent's empire would have grown beyond recognition, and she would emerge as a convicted felon with no family, no resources, and no prospects. As court officers prepared to escort Amber to begin her sentence, Vincent stood and walked toward the exit without looking back. His testimony had achieved its intended purpose, ensuring that his former daughter would face the full consequences of choosing to become his enemy. Outside the courthouse, Vincent was approached by several journalists seeking comment on his testimony against his own daughter. His response was brief and definitive. "Justice was served today," Vincent said simply. "The defendant made choices that harmed innocent people and violated the trust of her family. The sentence reflects the seriousness of those choices and will hopefully deter others from making similar mistakes." As Vincent walked away from the courthouse, he carried with him the satisfaction of a mission completed successfully. Diana was working minimum wage jobs to survive. Bradley was serving 12 years in federal prison, and Amber would spend her 20s learning that betrayal carried permanent consequences. The war they had started against Vincent Morrison was over, and their defeat was absolute. Vincent had demonstrated that loyalty was rewarded, while betrayal was met with destruction that extended to every aspect of his enemies' lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities for expansion, but today belonged to justice. The price of betraying Vincent Morrison had been paid in full, and the lesson would endure long after his enemies had served their sentences and faded into obscurity. Vincent Morrison never forgave those who chose to become his enemies, and today the world had learned exactly what that meant. Chapter 9: Empire's End. 2 years after Amber's sentencing, Vincent Morrison stood once again in his penthouse office, but this time he was not alone. Across from his desk sat Rebecca Torres, the private investigator whose work had uncovered his family's betrayal, and Dr. Amanda Sterling, whose forensic accounting had provided the foundation for their destruction. Together, they represented the team that had helped Vincent achieve total victory over his enemies. The meeting had been called to review the final status of Vincent's former adversaries and to discuss the long-term implications of his successful campaign of revenge. What had begun as the discovery of an affair had evolved into a comprehensive demonstration of what happened to those who chose to betray Vincent Morrison. The surveillance reports are comprehensive, Rebecca said, spreading photographs and documents across Vincent's conference table. All 3 targets have been monitored continuously since their sentencing, providing complete intelligence on their current circumstances. Vincent studied the materials with the same attention to detail he had always applied to business ventures and military operations. The photographs showed 3 people whose lives had been permanently altered by their decision to oppose him, each trapped in circumstances they could never escape. Bradley Hutchins was shown in photographs taken inside Federal Correctional Institution Coleman, where he was serving his 12-year sentence for corruption and fraud. The once polished real estate developer now wore prison uniforms and worked in the facility's kitchen for 23 cents per hour. His wife had divorced him, taken custody of their children, and moved across the country to ensure their names would never again be associated with his crimes. Bradley's appeals have all been rejected, Dr. Sterling reported, consulting her legal files. His conviction is final, and he'll serve at least 8 years before becoming eligible for parole. Even then, his felony record will prevent him from working in real estate or any profession requiring licensing or bonding. The photographs of Bradley showed a broken man who had aged years during his incarceration. His health had deteriorated due to the stress of prison life, and his former confidence had been replaced by the hollow expression of someone who understood that his life was effectively over. Diana's surveillance photographs were equally devastating, showing Vincent's former wife in her studio apartment in Milwaukee. She worked 2 retail jobs to afford basic necessities, her designer wardrobe replaced by discount store clothing, her luxury lifestyle reduced to careful budgeting for groceries and utilities. Diana's probation officer reports that she's compliant with all requirements, Rebecca continued. She works 40 hours per week at a department store and 20 hours per week cleaning office buildings. Her felony conviction prevents her from obtaining better employment, and her age makes career advancement unlikely. The woman who had once presided over charity galas and business dinners now spent her days folding clothes and emptying trash cans for minimum wage. Her social connections had disappeared entirely, leaving her isolated in a city where she knew no one and had no prospects for improvement. But the most dramatic transformation was captured in photographs of Amber Morrison, Vincent's former daughter, taken during visiting hours at Federal Correctional Institution Danbury. The privileged teenager had become a hardened prison inmate whose appearance reflected the brutal realities of federal incarceration. Amber's prison records show multiple disciplinary actions for fighting and contraband possession, Dr. Sterling reported. She's been placed in solitary confinement 3 times and has accumulated additional charges that will extend her sentence by approximately 18 months. The photographs showed a young woman whose face bore scars from prison violence and whose eyes reflected the psychological damage of prolonged incarceration. The girl who had once expected an Ivy League education and limitless opportunities now faced the prospect of spending most of her 20s behind bars, emerging as a middle-aged felon with no family, no resources, and no future. Has she made any further attempts at contact? Vincent asked, though his tone suggested the answer was purely academic. Multiple attempts through various intermediaries, Rebecca confirmed. Letters smuggled out through other inmates. Messages passed through prison chaplains. Even an attempted phone call using another inmate's number. All communications have been intercepted and documented per your instructions. Vincent reviewed copies of Amber's letters, noting how her tone had evolved from defiance to desperation to broken acceptance. Her most recent correspondence acknowledged that she had destroyed her own life through her choices and begged for any form of recognition from the father she had betrayed. The letters went unanswered, as Vincent had decreed they always would. Amber had chosen to become his enemy, and enemies did not deserve mercy or forgiveness regardless of their subsequent suffering. What about their long-term prospects? Vincent asked, settling back in his chair to review the comprehensive assessment his team had prepared. Dr. Sterling consulted financial projections that painted a bleak picture for all 3 former adversaries. Bradley will be unemployable in his chosen profession upon release, forcing him to accept minimum wage work while paying restitution to his victims. Diana's age and criminal record make career advancement impossible, ensuring she'll remain in poverty for the remainder of her life. Amber will emerge from prison as a middle-aged felon with no marketable skills and no family support system. The projections showed that Vincent's revenge would continue affecting his enemies long after their formal sentences were completed. They would spend the rest of their lives trapped in circumstances created by their decision to betray him, serving as permanent examples of the consequences of opposing Vincent Morrison. Vincent stood and walked to his office windows, looking out at the Chicago skyline that had served as the backdrop for his complete victory. Morrison Construction had expanded dramatically during the 2 years since his family's destruction, acquiring 3 major competitors and establishing operations in 6 new markets. The scandal surrounding his family's betrayal had actually enhanced his business reputation, demonstrating that Vincent Morrison could be trusted to protect confidential information and respond to threats with overwhelming force. Potential partners and competitors alike understood that crossing Vincent carried consequences that extended far beyond simple business retaliation. "The final element of our strategy has been the most effective," Vincent said, turning back to face his team. "Complete social isolation ensures that our targets can never rebuild their lives or threaten us again." Rebecca nodded, understanding the psychological warfare component of Vincent's revenge. Diana's attempts to rebuild social connections have all failed once her background becomes known. Bradley's family has completely disowned him to protect their own reputations. Amber has no friends or family willing to acknowledge her existence. The 3 people who had conspired to destroy Vincent Morrison now existed in complete isolation, cut off from the social and professional networks that might have provided hope for rehabilitation or redemption. They had been transformed from threats into cautionary tales, serving as permanent reminders of what happened to those who chose to become Vincent's enemies. As the meeting concluded, Vincent felt the deep satisfaction of a mission accomplished completely and permanently. His enemies had been identified, systematically destroyed, and permanently neutralized. Their suffering would continue for the remainder of their lives, ensuring that they could never again threaten him or anyone else he chose to protect. "The Morrison Construction empire is stronger than ever," Dr. Sterling reported as she gathered her files. "Revenue has increased by 40% since the elimination of competitive threats, and our expansion into new markets has exceeded all projections." Vincent's personal life had also been rebuilt on a foundation of loyalty and respect. He had formed relationships with people who understood the value of integrity and had proven themselves through years of faithful service. Marcus Webb remained his most trusted ally. Rebecca Torres continued to provide intelligence services, and Dr. Sterling managed the financial empire that grew larger each year. But perhaps most importantly, Vincent had established himself as someone who never forgot those who chose to betray him and never forgave those who became his enemies. His reputation for ruthless retaliation served as protection against future threats, ensuring that potential adversaries understood the permanent consequences of opposing him. As evening fell over Chicago, Vincent Morrison stood alone in his penthouse office, master of an empire built on loyalty and defended through strategic ruthlessness. The war that Diana, Bradley, and Amber had started was over, their defeat so complete and permanent that they had become footnotes in the story of Vincent's continued success. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities for expansion, but Vincent faced the future with the confidence of someone who had proven his ability to destroy any threat to his empire. He had demonstrated that betrayal carried a price his enemies could never afford to pay, and that lesson would protect him for the rest of his life. Vincent Morrison never forgave those who chose to become his enemies, and now the entire world understood exactly what that meant. The price of betraying Vincent Morrison had been paid in full, and the lesson would endure long after his enemies were forgotten. In the end, Vincent Morrison stood victorious and alone, exactly as he had planned from the moment he discovered their betrayal. Justice had been served, enemies had been destroyed, and the empire built on loyalty and defended through ruthless precision continued to grow stronger with each passing day. The war was over, and Vincent Morrison had won completely.